All right. Well, then I'm going to get started. Um, just a few housekeeping things first. Please keep yourself muted if possible, unless you are asking questions. And I do love to have questions asked. You can do it via the chat box or verbally. I do monitor the chat box. We'll kind of look off to the side. The session is being recorded, and the recording will be available probably sometime next week. But in the meantime, on our website, and I have the link at the end, but the ODA website, there will be this slide presentation on there and some additional handouts for if you would like to get them. I always like to say that I am not a lawyer, so this is not legal advice. If you do want to find definitive answers for anything, you should always talk to your district's lawyer, or as I'll talk about, there's the Ethics Commission for ethics issues and things like that. This is not meant to be anywhere near an end-all be-all for a lot of important topics. This is just kind of scratching the surface of some important things for you to know. And so you may remind you or tickle your brain that says, I think Eric said something about this, and I will ask my manager or another board member. So to introduce myself, my name is Eric Nussbaum. I'm with the Department of Agriculture, obviously, in the Soil and Water Conservation District program. My title is Operations Specialist, which is this fancy term for I do trainings, and I do one-on-one work with district managers and board members and entire boards when they have a lot of questions and need some assistance or coaching, things like that. I'm kind of the help for the kind of general help for districts. My background is that I used to manage the Siuslaw Soil and Water Conservation District out on the coast of Lane County. Small district, small staff, 1.5 people to 2, back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Then I was joined ODA. I want to almost say recruited, because my water quality specialist at that time told me I should apply. So I was a water quality specialist down in Southwest Oregon for about 5 years, maybe 6. And then I moved to this position doing these trainings and such about 10 years ago. So I've been with the department like 15, I guess it's 15 years. So that's my background. So I've actually been on the side of managing district and working directly with boards, as well as on this side from the Department of Agriculture. So what I'm going to do today, especially for you new directors, is go a little bit about who you are. I mean, hopefully you know a little bit about SWCD since you're on the board of directors. But I'm going into a little bit more detail about it. And then a little bit about the relationship between ODA and the Soil and Water Conservation Districts. What is this relationship that is between us? I'm going to go into what your the board of directors' powers are, a little bit about how you pay for the work that you do, public meeting law, public records law, and then ethics. So those last 3 are important. They're very detailed, and you're only going to get a tiny bit, but the tiny bit's hopefully enough that you can think about issues that might come up and ask your manager or other board members. So ORS stands for Oregon Revised Statute, and you'll hear that term a lot. Oregon Revised Statutes, for those who don't know, are laws enacted by the Legislative Assembly. It's what they're doing right now up in Salem, is they're working on statutes. If you ever heard of the term OAR, Oregon Administrative Rules, rules are actually made by state agencies, usually to implement the statutes written by the legislature. So ORS 568 is the primary statute that relates to soil and water conservation districts and the agricultural water quality program. As a director, at some point, you may want to read this. If you're a new director elected in the last fall, or probably appointed in the last year, we did send out some, let's see if I can find one here. Yep, here we go. We sent out these packets. Your color might be different, but it looked like this. And inside of it is actually the statutes there. along with a lot of other information and the ethics guidelines for you. If you need one of these because you haven't gotten one, or you've been around a long time and you'd like one, feel free. There's a wealth of information in there. So ORS 568 has a lot of different parts to it. These are some of the ones I'm going to go over with you. The policy of the legislature, general powers of the board of directors, what your 5 basic legal requirements are. I'm not going to really go over it, but there's also the bonding and taxing authority in there, which allows you to levy taxes or issue bonds. So for the gentleman who, Brad, you've been around a long time, you said, for a while, and I'm sure that you and maybe some of the newer people know the creation, I call it the creation myth of SWCDs. It's a great, creation myth about coming out of the Dust Bowl days and the development of the Soil Conservation Service, which is now NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and how soil and water conservation districts were formed as local partners for NRCS. That's all very true. However, it's also true that there is some legal definition of why you exist, and that's in ORS 568.225 of the policy. So I'm just going to read it to you, not all of it, but some of it. It starts out with what I have there. In recognition of the ever-increasing demands on the renewable natural resources of the state and of the need to conserve, protect, and develop such resources, it is hereby declared to be the policy of the Legislative Assembly to provide for the conservation of the renewable natural resources of the state, and thereby to conserve and develop natural resources, control and prevent soil erosion, control floods, conserve and develop water resources and water quality. And then actually there's a whole bunch more about wildlife and actually dams and recreational development. So this is saying that this is the policy of the legislature to conserve, protect, and develop the natural resources. So subsection 2 of the policy says, it is further the policy of the Legislative Assembly to authorize soil and water conservation districts to participate in effectuating the policy set forth in subsection 1 of this section. So essentially, in statute, it says that you have been created to help the legislature effectuate their policy, which is great. But it gives you kind of this legal definition of why you exist. The other part is 568.550, and that actually has what your powers and authorities are. This is important because as a special district, and you have a couple different definitions. You're defined as a municipal corporation, you're a local government entity, but you're also defined in statute as a special district. And a special district example beside yourselves is like a fire district, an irrigation district, a drainage district, a 911 district, library district, park and rec district, cemetery district. There's a whole plethora of special districts out there. And you are one of these different kinds of special districts. Well, by law, you are only allowed to do those things that the legislature has authorized you to do. You can't go outside your authorities. Your authorities are listed under 568.550. And the great thing about your authorities is they are very broad, and there are a lot of things that you are able to do. You probably don't think about it much. You think about, well, your job is to work with landowners to do conservation plans, to help them increase irrigation efficiency, do farming practices, deal with water quality. But all those things are actually specifically authorized for you to do. But you have a lot of other incredible authorizations, and those actually include being able to purchase land, or mortgage a building, issue general obligation bonds, do scientific research, do economic development, projects. Um, Act as an agent for the United States. It explicitly says you can accept donations. You can sue and be sued. You can put liens on property. There is a whole list of what you're able to do, which is really excellent. But what's important to know is that if it's not listed in about like these 2 pages of authorities for you to do, you're actually not allowed to do it. And that has come up with districts who have had some very ingenious, innovative things they would like to do, but they had to either not do them, or if they were doing them, stop doing them because they weren't authorized to do. So you should be aware of what's in 568.550. And if your district thinks of anything really new and great and different, you might just need to check to make sure that you can do it. Because sadly, as I said, some districts have come up with some great ideas and then discovered that it was not legal for them to actually do it. Any questions about that? Okay. So a little bit about the Oregon Department of Agriculture, because we're your partners. Just a little bit of structure of the Department of Agriculture. This is slightly out of date already because some people retired, but this is the latest one I could grab off our website. But it shows you the structure of the Department of Agriculture and all the really various things we do, which is quite a lot. We're a very broad agency and do a lot that a lot of folks don't even consider, don't think about agriculture. The important part there is the Natural Resource Program area, kind of to the right of center, led by Stephanie Page. She's our division director. She was my water quality specialist, and she actually is the one that encouraged me to apply to ODA 15 years ago. And that is where the SWCD program is, and also the Ag Water Quality Program. Some of you might deal with the noxious weed control program and get weed grants, and that would be over in the plant protection program. The natural resource program area is divided kind of into three areas with 3 managers: pesticides, the confined animal feeding operation, which also deals with fertilizers, and then the water quality and SWCD program. The SWCD program is very, very small. We might be just one of the smallest programs, well, at least in our side of the building, and it's composed of Sandy Hyatt, who is the grant officer. She administers the grants that you receive from OWEB, but we administer the grants, your district capacity grants, and then myself. SWCC over there to the left, that is the Soil and Water Conservation Commission. That is an advisory board to us, similar to how the Board of Agriculture advises the whole department. The Soil and Water Conservation Commission is made up of 7 appointed directors from districts around the state. Barbara Boyer is the chair. Barbara Boyer is the chair of the Yamhill SWCD, and she's also on the Board of Agriculture. Very busy woman. So when we meet with them quarterly, and we talk about what we're doing, we talk about policy changes we're looking at and get their feedback, and they also, take on issues that might be important to soil and water conservation districts. So the Soil and Water Conservation District program, we both have services and legal oversight. So our services is we do the capacity grant management, and that is, well, I'm going to go in a little bit about that a little bit later. And then Sandy also coordinates the director's elections, and so some of you who are newly elected may have talked to her. Certainly you might have gotten in mail from her. And then myself, I do the operational technical assistance. I answer a lot of phone calls and emails about questions about the operations of the district, assistance in writing policies or reviewing policies. And usually I do on-site trainings instead of like this. In normal years, I would have been out traveling around to the districts, going to each district that has asked for me to come and do this presentation or another presentation. In some years, we've, as I call it, done a dog and pony show, and a whole bunch of us have gone out and done regional trainings. do miss those. But that's my job, is to do training and provide operational assistance. And sometimes I do provide facilitation services. Sometimes there's issues between local watershed councils and districts, and I might come help facilitate some discussions or facilitate even within boards who are having some issues and would like someone neutral to come and help facilitate their meetings, and I've done that too. So then we have some legal oversight. The basic ones are that legally we have to review your annual work plan and long-range business plan. We also have to receive your annual reports and financial reports, your financial reports generally being your audit or financial review. And then if you're going to be making any boundary changes or merging between districts, we hold public hearings, or we at least have to approve certain like zonal boundary changes. Some of your districts have changed from 7 to 5, and you'll know that process, that you had to do a back and forth with us and get our approval for those boundary changes. There are some other kinds of oversight we have that are more obscure. Some of them are written in rule as opposed to statute, but we, generally speaking, don't use those other oversight statutes or rules at the moment. These are the basic ones that we do use. Any questions? All right. A little bit about the Ag Water Quality program, and then and how that fits in with what you do as a district. So way back when I started in the mid 90s, districts were just starting to receive some funding from ODA beyond like a very minimal amount. And that had to do with the Agricultural Water Quality Management Act. For those who don't know about that act was made by the legislature for a way for the agricultural community in rural lands to meet the requirements of reducing non-point source pollution. So I'm not going to go into detail here. We've had some in-depth sessions, and you can go ahead and download those presentations, look at the recordings. But essentially, what the Management Act said was that for regulating non-point source pollution on agricultural lands, try to meet total maximum daily loads, if you know what those are, ODA is going to have the oversight of that. And the way that was going to be done is, instead of doing a one-size-fits-all by creating rules for the entire state, we divided the state into local management areas. And there's about 42, I think, around the state. And each of those areas correspond to 1 or 2 SWCDs. And the Soil and Water Conservation Districts became the local management agency, our local partners, the ones that help with meeting the water quality standards. We also created local advisory committees with the help of the districts, and those committees were developed to help write the local rules of how water quality standards were going to be met in that local area, as well as the water quality local management area plan, which was how you were going to get to those standards. And so the legislature gave the Department of Agriculture a bunch of money to give to the districts to go develop these, put together the local advisory committees and develop the plans and the rules and start implementing the plan and doing outreach and things like that. That's back actually when I was there. That was one of the first things that happened when I started, was they started doing that. We have a water quality staff which works with the districts to do that. Once the plans were written and the rules developed and approved, it shifted more into trying to implement those plans, to work with the local landowners to help improve water quality and prevent water pollution, which is a lot of what you do right now. And so the money still came from the legislature to us, and that is kind of the basis of what the money, the capacity grant you have, was to work on implementing the local area management plans in conjunction with the water quality staff. And so those grants, as we'll talk about in a minute, are divided between district operations to keep your doors in, and then the scope of work and focus area money for you to work with the landowners and develop projects and provide them technical assistance. Since Measure 76, which was the permanent renewal of the lottery dollars to OWEB, that grants now are now going through OWEB, and that's why you sign agreements with OWEB. Well, we still manage those grants, but they are not directly from us anymore. But that's kind of the background about where that district capacity grant comes from, and that's why there's this focus on scope of work and working in focus areas to help landowners with water quality issues. Strategic implementation areas, that is similar to focus areas, but it's something that we do where we work in very specific areas to see if water quality rules are being met. And that's a whole other discussion that I'm not going to go into right now today. But if you do want more information about this, there's about a 45-minute presentation Ellen Hammond has done, and it has been recorded. So you can get that on our website. Are there any questions? That about wraps up like what that direct relationship with ODA is and how we interact with you. Well, there's a little bit more I'll get into. All right, so what is your responsibility as a board member? I'm going to tell you that it is my belief that your biggest responsibility is fiduciary. You're responsible for the public's money and to ensure that it is spent correctly. Just like you would hope that your county commissioners or a county court or the city council or the legislature would handle your money well, folks expect that the money that you get, either through if you're taxing district taxing money, or if you're getting grants, if you're getting donations, that you are responsible for that money and that it is being used correctly. So that is through budgets and financial reports, ensuring that your staff is spending the money correctly. And for some of you, you actually approve each and every expense. That's not true of every district, but a lot of districts do that. You also have oversight responsibilities to do performance evaluations and coaching of your manager, if you kind of a manager who then manages other people, or some of your districts actually do that directly with the staff. You have to have by law an annual work plan. That's your job to help develop it with your staff and then approve it and then monitor it and make sure that your staff is doing what you planned for them to do. And then the last part of that is public contracting. You are a contracting board, and you're responsible for public contracting. Long-range planning, one of the major jobs of any board of directors, whether it's for a nonprofit, a big corporation, or yourselves, is to develop and monitor a strategic plan, a long-range plan. What is the vision for your district? Where do you want it to go? Where do you see it in 5, 10, or 50 years? And that's your job also. And then lastly, you are elected officials. You were elected by the public, and it's your job to represent them and their interests at your board meetings. And that's another thing to remember, that is also your job. Oh, do associate directors have the same responsibilities? So yes, they do, I believe, have the same responsibilities. However, you probably do not, because you're not an elected official, you do not have some of the same probably legal responsibilities that the elected officials do. There are some legal, and we'll talk about this, for instance, ethics. Just because you're not elected, but as an associate director, as a volunteer, you would have some legal obligation under ethics. But you have been selected to be an associate director to help the district meet their responsibilities. So I would personally say that associate directors do have these responsibilities, though there may not be some underlying legal obligations. Okay. Did I answer your question? Great. So one of the things I like to joke about is that if you were, came to be an elected board member because you thought there'd be a lot of power and authority with it, you actually have absolutely none. The powers and authorities of the board of directors is a collective authority. It's not an individual authority. And so if you are going to be given the authority to do anything for the district, and I'll give you some examples in a moment, you have to be given that authority by the whole board. And some of those examples are here. So the first thing that has to happen is you need to ensure that your power is granted through a board action, a resolution, or a motion. And then you're able to do it. So some of the simple ones is like staff supervision. If you're going to obligate district funds, i.e. sign checks, that has to go through a board action. If you're going to speak on behalf of the district, you should get you actually need to get the board's permission to speak on behalf of the district. If you go to like a public hearing or a city council meeting and you want to speak on behalf of the district. Some directors manage projects, and you have to be given authority to do that. And also signing documents. Unless you actually have a job description for your chair or vice chair that says they are authorized to sign documents, they have to be personally authorized to sign documents on behalf of the board. They just don't get to do it just because they're chair. I'm a big believer in job descriptions, not only for your staff, but also for your board of directors, because in those job descriptions, you could outline different authorities in those job descriptions, like that the chair may speak on behalf of the district. The chair may sign contracts. And that way, when you change chairs, you don't actually have to go through and reauthorize the new person to do all the different things that the chair might do, or the treasurer, or the vice chair, or even just a new director coming in. And so I would encourage you to check with your manager or chair of the board to see if you have job descriptions for your board. If you don't, I do have examples for those. And that would solve this problem of not being sure if a particular board member was authorized to do a certain regular duty, like signing documents or something, or speaking on behalf of the district. Want to talk just really briefly about your relationship to employees, because this is important. As I said, that unless the board authorizes you to supervise employees, you don't supervise employees. You're not authorized to do that. So one of the things I think it's important for directors to, especially new ones, to figure out is what kind of supervision do you have over employees? Is it the board supervises the manager, or the chair supervises the manager, and then the rest of the employees are supervised by the managers? Or is there an individual board member supervising district staff because it's a small district and you only have like one manager or no manager, you just directly supervise the staff? I think there was one district who used a whole personnel committee to supervise the staff. Not a great idea, because that presents a lot of individual supervisors. And that gets to the point of wanting to say that the worst thing you can do for your staff is try to have 7, or in a 5-member board, 5 bosses and 5 different people or 7 different people going to your staff telling them what to do. So if you're not authorized to supervise the staff, you may not supervise the staff. You may not tell them what to do. You cannot direct the work they do. You cannot tell them, I want you to go down to Farmer John's to talk to him about an irrigation issue. You don't have that authority unless the board gave it to you. That doesn't mean you can't communicate with them. Every district has a different communication policy. Larger districts tend to want to go, have the board talk to the manager before talking to the staff people directly. And other places are a lot more casual. What you want to make sure not to do is waste your staff's time by going in and hanging out and just talking to them for a long time. They have important work to do. But if you want to go in and you need a bit of information from them, or you have some ideas you want to share with them, that's totally fine. Just make sure that if you're not authorized to supervise them, that you don't start directing their activities. That's not your job. A little bit about liability, especially as we talk about some of these other issues coming up. Um, the board as a whole is generally covered through your liability insurance. Most of you, I think actually all of you now, get your liability insurance through special districts. And at the end, I will tell you who special districts is. You'll hear their name a lot. As far as I'm aware, I've been told this in the past by lawyers, is that you know, a lot of times when there's a liability case, they'll name the district and they'll name all the board members individually. But the court will generally fold the board members into the general suit against the district and not allow those individual ones, except if there's willful neglect or dereliction of duty. That removes your individual protection, and you may have problems with your liability insurance. So, you know, willful neglect, I hate to say it, is sometimes when I've been coming to your meetings and I see you doing something and I let you know again and again and again that I don't think that that is legal what you're doing, or that opens you up to liability issues, and you ignore me or you ignore a legal advice from a lawyer, the courts can actually come back and say, you know, you were told what you were supposed to do, but that was willful neglect. Dereliction of duty is you knew you should do something, or, you know, or you just didn't do your job. And we've seen this with some districts, some issues where the financial health of the district deteriorated to a great degree, and a lot of it had to do with the board not doing their fiduciary responsibility, not asking for proper financial reports, not following up on issues that were obvious should have been done, and that's more a dereliction of duty, and that also could remove your individual protection if the court deemed that you were derelict of duty. So don't ignore me, don't ignore your lawyers, and make sure to do your job. Any questions on that? All right. So the 5 basic legal requirements. So in ORS 568, as I said, there's 5 basic legal requirements that you have to do. There are lots of other legal requirements, especially as an employer, but these are the ones that are in Oregon Revised Statute 568. So by law, you have to have an annual work plan. And that part of that is why we have to review it, is ensure that you have that annual work plan, and you have to have a long range plan. We just ask that you send us one to have on file, because those are generally good for 5 or more years. Then annually, you have to have an annual meeting of the landowners. It's actually not your meeting, it's the landowners meeting, but you put it together and host it. An annual meeting of landowners that is properly noticed. And there's certain ways to notice meetings, and that is part of a whole other discussion. And at that annual meeting, you have to present your annual report, also another requirement. Your annual report can look any way you want. I've seen one-pagers, I have seen multiple pages, I've seen it done as a calendar, whatever way you're going to report to the landowners what you've done in the last fiscal year. And then also your annual financial report. Both legally as a special district, you have to turn in your audit to the Secretary of State, or your report in lieu of audit. But by law, you also have to present that to your landowners at your annual meeting. A little bit about money. So this district capacity grant, as I said, which originated as a way to help develop those water quality management area plans, and to put together the local advisory committees, and then work toward meeting the requirements of those area plans. It's a little bit looser now because it comes from OWEB. It also is for anything related to watershed health. But we divide it into 2 sections: your operations, keep your doors open, paying for rent, telephone, things like that. And in the scope of work, or focus area, where you're working either on general technical assistance to your landowners, or you work in a very specific area, your focus area. If you want more information about that, you should talk to your managers or your staff and see what is in the scope of work, and where is your focus area. Just for interest, just your quarterly reports are due to us on the 15th of the first month of each quarter, where you do your financials and your task reporting. Most staffs are really good at that. Some staffs get a little behind on that, and we generally start outreaching to the staff and also the chair of the district if it gets too far behind. And then every year you have to do an end of year report to us. Some other deadlines, just so you're aware, and you can kind of keep tabs on your staff, is that your financial review or audit is due December 31st to the Secretary of State, and a copy of it to us. A report in lieu of audit, if you make under a certain amount of money, which is very low bar, then that's usually due, I believe it's August 31st. You have an annual report for the previous fiscal year, that's due by June 30th to us. And then you have this annual meeting, could be any time during the year. It's concerning the last fiscal year, but you have to make sure your audit's done because you need to present that at your annual meeting. Anything about those things before we move into public meeting law? All right. So I'm going to go over public meeting law and public records law and ethics in very abbreviated form because there's a lot to them, but there are some things that you need to be made aware of as a board member. All right. So here I have the definition of a public meeting. So that is when your board gets together, or as we'll talk about, committees or task force. When we talk about a quorum, we're talking about for your board, we're talking about the elected officials, not the associate directors. We're talking about the elected officials. When it gets to committees, it's anyone who's appointed by the board in committees. So when you hold a public meeting is when a quorum of the members of that governing body, your board of directors, meets. It is a public meeting, and the public has the right to attend that meeting. Oregon is a sunshine state. That doesn't mean that they have the right to participate. The idea about public comment having to happen is a myth. You don't have to allow public comment in regular board meetings, but it is good public policy to allow the public to make comments. There are kinds of meetings where you do have to allow testimony or public comment. There are also particular topics that you would have to make sure that they could do public comment, but those are outlined in law. But generally speaking, they don't have the right to give public comment. So one of the biggest questions I get is, do committees or subcommittees or naming something a task force have to meet public meeting law? If that group is appointed by the board, it then becomes its own like mini governing body, and they have to follow the same rules. So it doesn't matter who is on that committee. It doesn't matter if you appoint one board member, a minority of board members, so only like 2 of a 5-member board. If you appoint staff to it, members of the public, it acts like its own board of directors. And so if that group has been given authority to make decisions on behalf of the board or make recommendations to the board, then they follow the same rules as the board. If that committee needs a quorum of people to meet and make decisions, then it has to notice the meeting. We're going to talk about what you have to do. It has to notice the meeting, keep minutes for the meeting, and distribute those minutes just like a regular board meeting. So I just want to reiterate, it does not matter how many people are on that committee. If it's appointed by the board, it acts like its own board with the same set of rules for public meeting. Is that clear? If it's not clear, you can type it in there or ask a question. It's one of the biggest questions I get a lot of time, and corrections I have to discuss with districts. Quorum. So sometimes there's a misunderstanding of what a quorum is. Quorum is defined by law, and for soil and water conservation districts, a quorum is a majority of the positions, whether they are filled or not. So if you have a 7-member board, in order to have a quorum, you have to have 4 people there no matter what. Maybe there's 2 empty positions, so you only have 5 filled positions. you still need to have 4 board members present to have a quorum and to be able to make decisions. If you have a 5-member board, that number, of course, is 3. That is true of trying to pass any kind of motion or resolution, make any kind of decision at a board meeting. It's for the number of positions. So if you have a 7-member board, you must always have 4 yay votes. If you have a 5-member board, 3 yay votes. Doesn't matter if only 3 people are there, you still need to have either 3 or 4 votes depending on the size of your board. And again, that's positions, not filled positions or people present. I did get asked early on, I think the first time I did this, is what about abstentions? Abstentions are not a yay vote. So if someone abstains, and that means that you only have 2 or 3 yay votes, depending on the size of your board, that motion doesn't pass. You've effectually voted nay by abstaining. And remember too that this is public meeting law, so it's not just your board of directors, but this also holds true of committees. Though committees, it may have 3 people on it, 5 people, 4 people, 8 people, 10. So you have to adjust the numbers for what a majority is and what a quorum is, and how many votes you need for decision making. So there's 2 important things that you need to do at a public meeting. One is you have to give notice, and the other one is to give minutes, and we'll talk about both. So the first thing is you have to properly notice a meeting. You have to let the public know that you're having a meeting. And if you don't properly let them know, it's a violation of public meeting law. And if you violate public meeting law, all your decisions are void, dating back, from when that meeting was. There are some remedies to that. You can go ahead and, when you do have a properly noticed meeting with a quorum, you can retroactively approve those same decisions. But it's important to have a properly noticed meeting. So what is a notice? Well, a notice says, when and where it is and what you're going to talk about. Those are the kind of just the real basics there. And so how far in advance do you have to give notice to the public? Well, for a regular board meeting, it actually doesn't say how long, but it probably should be at least a week. You want the public to know. Special meetings have a 24-hour requirement and some other requirements, and emergency have others. I'm not going to go into detail about those, but you do have to give proper notice. You also have to ensure that anyone who is asked in writing to be noticed of your meetings, that you let them know in the form that they want. If they want an email, great. Or if they want a good old-fashioned snail mail agenda, you got to send them a good old-fashioned snail mail agenda. But anyone who's asked to be noticed, you have to let them know. So if you're going to have an executive session, and we're going to talk about executive session in a moment in a meeting, that has to be part of the notice, and you have to state that it's not open to the public, and you have to explain why you're having this executive session, and you have to do it very particularly. You have to give the exact statute, and in a second we'll talk about that. As far as, how do you post your notice? The one sure, true way to make sure that you meet that noticing requirement, according to the Attorney General, is to send it to your local media representative or your newspaper of general circulation, if you have one in your area. And you're not responsible for what they do with it, but you're responsible for getting it to them. So the best way is you send your agenda to your local newspaper. They often have a special email for that, or a place to upload that, or a place to fill in. Some will have an online application, form to fill out. But all you have to do is let the newspaper know. That is the limit of your liability for a regular meeting. There are kinds of other meetings that have to be noticed differently, but for a regular meeting, send it out. Other important things you could do is if you have a mailing list, sending out to the mailing list. You can put it on notice boards, the good old, feed store, Grange, whatever you'd like. And I don't know if it's still true that in some parts of the state, that's the only way to do it because there is no newspaper general circulation. There is no real news media, and so you still put it up on notice boards. And you could also put it up on your website and then also social media. But those still are not sufficient on their own. The only thing that will ensure that you meet the guidelines is to send it to your local paper. Again, not your responsibility if it does not get published or they don't mention it. Getting to executive session law. So this is a part of a meeting where you is closed to, I say certain persons, because you are allowed to have whoever you want in there, and the news media must be allowed to attend, and is for discussing particular sensitive matters. They are very particular. There's only about a dozen of them. And the important thing about executive session law is you can only talk about those specific things, or you violate executive session law, which is actually much more severe than violating public meeting law. So some examples for districts, which are very common, is discussing employment of a public officer or employee, discussing disciplinary matters for board members or employees, or complaints against board members or employees, performance evaluations, exempt records. For instance, if you're going to be talking about sage grouse plans on the east side, federal records, and there's a lot of federal records NRCS has that you might be wanting to look at, are exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. So then you can go into executive session to look and discuss those, or consulting with your lawyer. If you're consulting with your lawyer for litigation or expected litigation, the term is litigation most likely to be filed, you can go in executive session. You can't go in executive session just to talk to your lawyer. That's not allowed. There has to be about litigation. So real briefly, I did a whole hour-long presentation about how to do executive sessions, but the chair or presiding officer, if the chair's not there, has to announce the statutory authority very specifically. It goes 192.660 subsection 2 subsection, and it's like A through H or something like that. And you have to say exactly what it is you're going to be talking about, and it has to meet one of those criteria. The news media is allowed to attend. This is because they're the watchdog. They're to make sure that you only talk about what you said you were going to talk about, because if you stray off the topic, they get to report on what you talked about. And also, if you stray off that topic, you're going to be violating executive session law and have probably a complaint filed against you. Minutes are required. Unlike regular minutes, as we'll talk about in a minute, regular minutes have to be kept and typed out, transcribed if they're recorded, and have in written form. And a physical copies of minutes need to be kept. Executive session minutes can be kept as a recording, or they can be kept typed, transcribed, and kept separate. Or a board member who's present can handwrite out some minutes. And then those are usually kept separate, and they're like in a sealed envelope in a locked cabinet. You do need to keep minutes of one form or another in case there is litigation in the future and a judge requests that those minutes be unsealed. Very important is that if an employee or a board member, because if you're discussing disciplinary action or complaints, requests a public session, the meeting has to be held in public. It is the employee or board member's choice that is being discussed. So one of the things is if you're going to have an executive session, and you can have an executive session on the fly, you get to the board meeting and something came up, or I was at a board meeting where they decided that they would do a performance evaluation that night, you need to make sure the employee is informed. Hopefully they're there, or at least they're called up on the phone, but somehow they must be informed that they have the choice that it be in public, or they waive that right that it's in public, and they can go ahead and do that performance evaluation or disciplinary matter in executive session. I will let you know that one of the most common executive session violations that leads to fines is not informing someone that you're going to be talking about them in executive session because of usually a disciplinary action or a complaint against them. You need to make sure that they know so they can ask for that public session if they want. If they waive that right to a public session, then when you go in executive session, you can choose whether you want them there or not. You could say, we're going to talk about you, but we don't want you here. They waive the right for a public session, and they may not, you don't have to have them there. Or you could have them there for part of the session and then ask them to leave. Sometimes that's in like performance evaluations. You talk to them, and then maybe they might leave so you can have further discussions. And then finally, you can't make a final decision in executive session. As I said, Oregon is a sunshine state. Everyone gets to know how you voted. There are no secret ballots. So if you made a decision in executive session, no one will know how you voted. So to make any final decision, you have to come out into public session and make a motion or resolution and take a vote on it so that everyone knows how you voted. If you violate executive session laws, they're investigated by the Ethics Commission. And I will let you know that it's a $1,000 penalty per violation if you even just participate in the meeting. Not if you run the meeting, not if you were the chair that forgot to say what the statute was. If you are there in the meeting and it was a violation of executive session law, you are personally liable for that $1,000 fine. So it's good to know when you should hold the legal reasons to hold it and make sure that they happen in the correct method, especially the one where you stray from the topic. That's one of the other ones that will get people fined. I was at a session, it was actually at Marion, where they had one of the Ethics Commission members come and do a presentation. And she literally said that if you feel in any way that there is a violation of executive session law when your district is having one, that you should stand up and say you believe there's a violation of executive session law to get it into the minutes and walk out of the room. Because if you don't do that, if you just sit there and think, oh, I don't think this is right, this might be wrong, and indeed it turns out to be wrong after an investigation, you are liable for that $1,000 fine, even if you just sat there quietly because you thought there might be a problem. So just keeping that in mind. Unfortunately, those 2 sessions I did on it are done, but you can go onto the website and get the presentation, and next week a recording of the whole presentation. Any questions? Okay.
Yeah, Eric, it's Deb Boone. On that last point you made, so what if you think there's been a violation and you leave and then it's determined there wasn't?
Well, then nothing happens. But you covered yourself, as they say, just in case.
Okay.
You're not going to get in trouble for walking. You can walk out and leave a meeting anytime you want, for any reason. That's your right as a citizen. But yeah, there's going to be no penalty for you to do that. Or I actually went through and read a lot of the decisions, final orders at the commission. You can look them up. You can see which districts had violated public executive session law in the past or had ethics violations. It's very interesting. And often the case, it's a fellow board member or the employee who was talked about who files the complaint. And sometimes it's upheld, and sometimes it's not. But either way, it's fine to file that complaint, and you won't get in trouble for walking. Your other board members might be upset, but you won't be in trouble. I hope that answers your question, Deb.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So public meeting law, you have to have written minutes. So it just can't be kept in a sound recording. And interestingly, still you must have them actually in physical form. You can't just keep them electronically. You actually have to have them typed, printed out, typed. Well, it used to be typed out. That's because physical copies on paper or vellum in the old days is the only thing that is technology proof. Because how many minutes are actually on a floppy drive that people can't access now? So by law, they actually have to be written and kept in a physical form. I wrote down the comments there, or contents. The one that's important is that you need to be able to tell how each person voted, how each board member. Really simple. If at the top you have who attended the meeting, and then it says the motion passed unanimously. That's easy. You know everyone voted yes. But I have seen and asked for corrections where it says the motion passed on a 5-2 vote, and that's all it says. Well, unfortunately, you don't know how people voted, who voted yay and who voted nay. So you do need to make clear one way or the other how each person voted. Usually by saying, the motion passed 5-2, nay votes coming from John and Jane, something like that, just so you know how you can extrapolate from that who voted yes and who voted no. As I said before, your executive session minutes are kept separately, usually in a locked cabinet. Your minutes have to be kept forever. If you really want some fun, you could go and try to find your minutes from back from the 40s or 50s or whenever your district started. And then you got to make sure when you distribute the minutes that they get sent to everyone who's requested those minutes in writing. The same way that you have to send out meeting notices to whoever has requested meeting notices in writing. All right, that's a very quick public meeting law information. Any questions about that? All right, public records law. It parallels public meeting law where the public gets to attend your meeting so you know what you're doing. Same way the public gets to inspect any of your records so they know what you're doing. Unless there's especially prohibited in statute. So there are exempt records, and there's actually a lot of different kinds of exempt records. What is a public record? Basically, a public record is anything that you produce in writing, and writing is loosely defined to be not just physical writing, but also emails, text messages, voicemails, anything you kind of produce that has some kind of physical quality. But text messages and voicemail aren't really physical, but they're considered public records. And that any of you, your board members and associate board members, because you're public officials too, and or your staff create. So that actually means that if you're writing on a piece of paper some notes right now about this meeting, that's a public record that the public gets to look at. If you send an email to the manager asking, when is our next meeting happening, or I think that what you're doing is a great job, that email is a public record. All those little Post-it notes that a lot of us have all over the place that are public employees, those are technically public records the public gets to look at. So it's important to know that emails between directors and the staff or the office are considered public records and have to be disclosed if there's a request. So I want to let you know, and I say this all the time, that as a director, I highly suggest that you get a separate email for doing district business. This is because that if there is a public records request, you might have to go through all your emails and your personal emails to find anything related to that public records request. Worse is if there is a lawsuit and the judge, authorizes a subpoena, your personal email account can be subpoenaed, and that means that you have to give some lawyer your password to your email, and they get to look through all your personal email to see if there's any records, public records, related to that lawsuit. And I don't know about you, but I don't know if I want a lawyer going through all my personal emails. So I highly suggest that you get a separate email, super easy. If the district doesn't have their own email addresses that they can dole out, just get a separate Gmail one. I know a lot of districts that do that, or Yahoo, or whatever you want. Super easy to do that. It's actually, and so text messages and voicemail is the same with text messages. If you're using your phones for text messages, you actually have to keep those text messages up until you're allowed to get rid of them. And those are also discoverable too. And you would have to sort them and look through them to see if you were meeting a public records request. Voicemails are actually really convenient, because voicemails, if they're on, as long as they exist, they're public records, but those you're allowed to delete right away. And so it's always best to delete your voicemails right away so they don't remain public records. The good news is though everything you're doing, all these pieces of paper, all the scrap pieces of paper and all that are public records the public can ask to see. You don't have to keep them all. Your records retention policy will let you know how long you have to keep all these documents. Obviously, you want to keep documents if you're using them, or if you need them for your district's record or for your personal record. But as long as you have them, they are public records, and people can ask to look at them. But the records retention policy tells you specifically how long you hold on to those records before you can dispose of them. The state has minimum standards, and then the district can create their own retention policy if they want to increase any of those minimum standards. And I do see a message, a thing here. So I have a question on the oath of office. We are doing them tonight, and one of my directors objects to the wording "support the Constitution." I would like to place the word "support" with "uphold." Is that okay? I believe, I don't know the answer to that. I'm trying to remember if the exact wording is in the Oregon Constitution or not. And so I wouldn't actually worry about it too much if they would, to be honest. I can't tell you if it's totally legal or not. Your risk of exposure of someone, getting really upset about that is probably very minimal if they'd like to do it. Not as the legal advice here, but if I was there, I wouldn't worry too much about it. So, actually, I got to the bottom where you don't have to share that. Sorry about that. But I would. That's my unofficial legal opinion. Is trading support to uphold. They're pretty much synonyms. So, I think you'll probably be doing okay. If anyone has a private question, if you go down to the Dropbox, you can actually, where it says "to," say just "to the presenter" or "to my name," and it comes up in a different color, and I'll know that it's more of a private message. So, sorry about that. So getting back to your retention schedule. So I always say that if you don't need to have the document because it's past its retention time, or you don't even need to. I guess it actually did say to me, only I didn't actually get it. So anyway, so if you don't need that document, it's not required to be retained, because like drafts of documents don't need to retain. Generally speaking, your notes that aren't pertaining to a particular project or some issue may not need to be retained. It all listed out there in the retention policy. So you don't want to hold on to it if you don't need it. So that way you don't have to disclose it if asked for it. Public records requests. So the public gets to request your records. And you need to have a public records request policy about how you respond to those requests. It has to include how much you might charge, because you are allowed to recuperate costs, and actually who they are supposed to contact, the custodial information, and then also outline the time frame that you are going to respond. I just did today a whole session on that, and so if you need more details about those things, you can look at the recording of that session. But your staff should know that, or they can contact me. If you need to know your exemptions, what you can and can't reveal. If you're in doubt, it's always good to get legal counsel. Always, you can call me first, and we can walk through it and see if it's something a simple matter with a simple answer, or you might go to need legal counsel. The personal information of staff, home addresses, home phone numbers in general are exempt. But interestingly, addresses, telephone numbers, and for whatever reason, dates of birth of elected officials are not exempt from disclosure. So if someone from the public wants to know where you live and what your telephone number is and when you were born, they get to be given that information. The only exemption to that is if you can show that there is a personal safety issue, and you actually have to ask the district in a written letter, and it actually has to go through a process to see if you actually meet the definition of personal safety danger. And they're actually only for a limited time. You actually have to renew them after a certain set of time, and it's very specific. So I just like to tell directors that elected official, and that's for all elected officials, not just you at the district, but city councilors, the governor, Secretary of State, your county commissioners, all of you elected officials, your addresses, telephone numbers, and dates of birth are public information. Any questions? All right, the last one here I'm going to talk about is ethics. So ethics is important because you can get fined for ethics violations. Those who have been in Oregon at least a few years know that a governor lost his job because of ethics violations. So it is important to know. So who is covered by ethics? Well, it's a public official. And a public official is not just the elected officials, but also volunteers like associate directors, employees, and then agents of the district, folks who represent the district in some way, maybe perhaps as a contractor. Also covered, and this is really important, are your relatives, and the definition of relatives is down below. Anyone who lives in your house, and then businesses with which you're associated. I'm not going to go into details of that, but those are defined. But essentially, if you are an officer of a business or own a certain stake, debt instrument, or have invested in certain kinds of businesses, those are businesses. And that is really important. It's not just you, but it's also your relatives and people you live with. So ethics basically says you cannot use your position to obtain financial gain or avoidance of financial detriment just because of your job. We call it the but for, but for your office that you couldn't do something. So some really obvious easy ones are that using the district copy machine. You just need to make a few personal photocopies, not a big deal. Well, actually, that's a violation of ethics law if the public is not allowed to do that too. If you have this open copy machine policy and anyone from the public can come in and use the copy machine, that would be fine. But generally, that's not the case, and so that would be a violation. Or some districts have nice big trucks, and you just think it might be okay just to borrow that truck because you need to move something real quick. That's not okay either. That would be a violation of ethics law because the public does not get to use that. So that's kind of the basic law there. But we're going to go into a little more details about ethics law. So these are some exceptions. The underlined one is the one I'm going to talk about in detail here. So if you have an administrative interest over someone or some business, you have to be careful not to receive gifts of more than $50 per calendar year. So what does that mean? So that would mean that if you would make decisions that would affect that person or business, And the example I use is back when I was managing the SWCD, I had the authority to sign contracts and issue contracts up to $5,000 before the board had to do that. We did a lot of small grant projects, and we had a particular vendor, excavator person who we did a lot of work with because he was always available, he was inexpensive, and he knew what he was doing because he worked with us a lot. And we would get together on occasionally to talk about projects and to just clarify things. And he'd want to buy me lunch. Well, that was okay as long as in a calendar year he did not spend more than $50 on me and my lunches or whatever, or gifts. If you wanted to give me a gift basket for the holidays, totally fine. But all that stuff can't add up more than $50 per calendar year. It is important to remember that ethics law also includes your relatives. So this person can't just, say, well, I'm not going to give, Eric $50 calendar year, but I'm going to turn around and give his parents tickets to a Beaver football game. That can't happen because that your relatives are covered under ethics law, and tickets to Beaver football games, I'm sure, are worth more than $50. So that would be a violation of ethics law. The one exception to that would be if there is some kind of relationship before you took on this position, either a board person or a manager or whoever has this administrative authority. You had some kind of relationship with that person ahead of time. Before that, as if you were, like, say, neighbors ahead of time, and as neighbors or friends, you regularly gave a particular gift or style of gift every year. So if your neighbor, you exchanged really nice bottles of wine or a case of wine every year worth more than $50, but that had been going on for a number of years before you became a board member, that would be okay. On the other hand, if they used to give you, your $20 bottle of wine at Christmas, and now they're giving you a $50 bottle of wine every opportunity they see you, that would be a violation because that was not a regular occurrence before you became a board member. Any questions about that? Okay. Additional prohibitions. Oh, yes. Question?
I'm sorry about that. The person, I missed what you said. The first, if it was a person you're working with, or what? Who is the person you can't take a gift for more than $50 from?
Someone you have administrative interest over. So,
okay.
So like if you were, as a board member, you were approving contracts, and so anyone, or, but that also goes the other way too. Is if you are you a board member or an associate board member?
A board member.
Okay. So you couldn't receive gifts for more than $50 from any of your staff that you might be doing performance evaluations on, or giving pay raises to, or deciding whether to fire them. So unless there has some long-standing relationship, like you've known that person since they were a child, and you've given gifts back and forth worth more than $50, you'd probably be okay with that. But if suddenly, suddenly you're their supervisor, or they work for you, and suddenly they start taking you out to lunch all the time, that's not going to be okay. You can take them out to lunch because they don't have an administrative interest over you. You can take them out to lunch and spend more than $50, but not the other way around. Is that clear?
Okay. Yeah, and you said it includes your relatives. So what about, unless you have just gotten married or something, for example, and your husband, you've only been married for 6 months and you've never had a Christmas, does that Christmas present, your first Christmas present, count? Do they go that deep?
Between you and your husband? Or?
Yeah.
Well, I guess the question would be, is do you have an administrative interest over your husband through the district? I mean, I guess if, if the district.
Or if you, or family, or a family member. I'm just thinking, say you helped your kids or some family, some relative with a project, does that
probably
mean that they can't give you presents?
Probably not. I mean, as I said, so relatives, I'm glad you brought that up because I believe they changed the law like between relatives. However, there are other actually conflict of interest that might come up that we're going to talk about, which is if there's a financial gain between relatives for some action you do. If you have some specific thing that comes up, you should give me a call and we could talk about it. You just need to think about, do you have some kind of administrative interest between them? And it actually, if it deals with relatives, most often that's actually going to fall under conflict of interest rather than this $50 gift. And so that's a good lead in.
Okay.
We'll talk about conflict of interest. Thank
you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And feel free to give me a call offline if you want to go through a particular issue that you might have. So conflict of interest, and we're going to define conflict of interest in a minute. There are two different kinds. There's potential conflict of interest and an actual conflict of interest. One of them allows you to go ahead and discuss and vote, and one does not. In either case, you have to announce in the meeting where you might be making a decision publicly the nature of the conflict of interest, and then get it into the minutes. And then you either can participate if it's potential or not participate and vote if it's actual. So let's look at what these might be. So an actual conflict of interest is, any action or decision you might make that would give you a benefit or detriment of a person, either yourself or your relative or any business with which you're associated with. So some real clear examples here, and is that if you're voting on a contract where it would be going, to yourself. There are some districts, especially in smaller counties, where board members might be doing projects and contracting on projects. Totally fine, but that's a conflict of interest to be voting yourself a contract for $50,000. So therefore, you need to declare an actual conflict of interest and not participate in the discussion and not vote on it. Or another one would be if there is the board is voting to do, say, a project on your property. Well, there's a conflict of interest, or could be. It might be a potential, but generally speaking, you would probably be avoiding a financial detriment by not having to pay for all your fencing, say, or pay for a manure storage set, or pay for an upgraded watering system or irrigation system. And so that would be a conflict of interest to you to vote or discuss that matter when your project was up before the board of directors, if they were going to make any decision about it, to send it in. If you were just going to send it, voting to send it to OWEB for consideration, that'd be potential because you don't know if you're going to get the grant. However, if it was being discussed to decide to put something out for bid related to your project, that would probably be an actual conflict of interest. Another one is if you have a relative who works for the district, and there are districts where a board member is related under those definitions, spouse, parent, or spouse's siblings, I guess spouse siblings not on there anymore, or your siblings, children, your siblings. And so in that case, as a board member, you cannot participate in any kind of discussion or vote related to, say, disciplinary action, giving them a raise. You could argue that you probably might not want to vote on the budget if the budget is actually showing an increase, like a wage increase for them or a wage decrease for them. You can't vote if, for instance, to fire them or lay them off. That would be an actual conflict of interest. So those are some very common ones. So you just got to think that, is there a relationship, either a business relationship or a relative relationship under that definition, between you and something you're voting on? Is that clear about what an actual conflict of interest would be? And maybe that answers your question, Deb.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. So a potential conflict of interest is when you're unsure that there would be, or it's unclear that there would actually be a benefit or detriment to the person. And the example of that, as I had just said, was if the board was voting to submit a grant to OWEB that was on your property or would affect your business, or if the board would say, we're going to put this project out to bid, this contract out to bid, and you know you're going to bid on it, that would be potential. You don't know you're going to get that contract, but you have the potential to make money off that contract, and so that'd be potential. And in that case, as I said, you can go ahead, just declare it, get it in the minutes, and then go ahead and discuss and vote on it. There are some exceptions to that. The more important ones is if your board is actually voting to do something that might benefit a whole class of people. An example of that is there is at least one, if not two districts that bulk buys pesticides and resells it, probably at a discount than it would be if they had to drive 300 miles to get those pesticides. And the board members will want to also purchase those pesticides. That's totally fine, because that is, you're treating everyone equal in your class. All your agricultural landowners are allowed to do that. And way in the past, I don't think it's happened recently, but districts have purchased seed after a fire or hay at discount to resell to at a very steep discount to people affected by wildfires, including themselves. Again, that's totally fine because it affects everyone the same. Membership or being on the board of a 501c3 or 6 or 4 or 5, that is fine. To vote, like say you want to give a grant to a nonprofit that you are sitting on, and this might most likely be if a watershed council, where as a board member you're also on the watershed council board, that's perfectly fine. There's an exemption for that. And then the final one here is if there is the vote is necessary to meet the requirements of a minimum number of votes to take action. So as I talked about under quorums and voting, if you've got a 5-member board and only 3 board members are there and one has to declare an actual conflict of interest and not vote, well, you're kind of stuck. You can't actually pass that motion or resolution that you were going to have. In that case, that person who has the actual conflict of interest, they declare it. They do not participate in the discussion or debate, but they are allowed to just simply vote. Although you can do that, I always say just because you can doesn't mean you should. Doesn't look good if you have vote yourself that $50,000 contract, even though it might be legal in that case. Always better to try to get another board member on the phone or delay that vote for another time. Is that clear? So that's ethics in a nutshell. The good thing is that if you have concerns about ethics, you can actually go to the Ethics Commission. You pay them a annual fee, and as part of that, you get to go ask them questions and ask them if certain circumstances would be a violation of ethics law. All right, who is special? So this is some acronyms that you may see thrown around. Special Districts Association of Oregon is an association of all the different kinds of special districts, from fire districts, park and rec districts, irrigation districts, water districts. And they provide insurance. I think every district now gets insurance through them, liability insurance, medical insurance for some, auto insurance. And they do a lot of trainings and provide financial services to districts too. OACD is the Oregon Association of Conservation Districts. That's your membership organization for all the districts. One of the main jobs that they do is lobbying, especially this time of year, on behalf of districts. They track the bills and they do lobbying, but they also do a lot of training too. And they coordinate between some of the other conservation partners and ODA. Ocean is the SWCD employees group. Oregon Conservation Education Assistance Network. And people other than employees can be like associate members of that organization. The big thing that they do every year is put on what's called Connect. That is a big, giant conference for the staff and board members of SWCDs as well as watershed councils. It's a great gathering. It's like 300 to 400 people at this point. Even though it didn't happen last year, and I think this year it might be virtual, it's a great thing for you to attend to when you can, and that's one of the prime things they do. NOWC, Network of Oregon Watershed Councils, that's the Watershed Council version of OACD, they support the work of the watershed councils, represent them, and they work closely with Ocean and OACD and the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts to do trainings and webinars and things like that. And in OWEB, if you don't know who OWEB is, they're the ones with the money. They get the lottery funds that distribute as grants. They pay for the capacity grants for districts and watershed councils and all those fund restoration projects that you do out there. So lastly, just some resources. There's our program staff. We're available by phone or email at any time. We love to help you out. We love to talk to you. We have a great website where you can find, eventually a recording of this session, but also all the materials for this session and all the other sessions. And there's whole sections on district operations. We have this great district guidebook. You can get it on our website. Every district has a physical copy somewhere in your office, and I'm constantly updating it. And this is just a wealth of information about how a district's run, gets into the nitty-gritty details about budgeting, long-range planning, working with your partners, what it means to be an employer. And then there are email lists galore out there from the different partners. And in special districts is actually folks who I use quite a bit, and I will send, if I don't have an answer, I'll send you to special districts because they actually do have lawyers, and the lawyers can be very helpful to give you a legal answer. Some of their legal answers are free if it's simple, or you can actually hire their lawyers to give you more detailed answers. And that's it. We are ending right at 5:30. So you have any questions before we finish?
I just want to say thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad to help out. Usually I go to board meetings and do this, but in person, which is what I mostly enjoy. And hopefully I'll be back out there. But if anyone wants this presentation either virtually or when we can meet in person, I'm glad to do it for each district as they need it. If there's no other questions, then I will say goodbye and thank you very much.